Hello, gang, and welcome back to another edition of the New Ham. My name is Scott, call sign W4OLV. Thanks all of you subscribers. Thanks for all of the folks who have subscribed recently. If you have not subscribed, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button down there in the lower right hand corner. Give us a thumbs up, hit the bell so that you know when the next video is coming out. Again, we want to continue to grow the channel, and I cannot do it without you all. Thanks again. So, this topic was actually suggested by one of the viewers, and I wanted to cover it because I think it's pretty important. So let me start out by saying you've done all the hard work up front. You've studied, you've passed the exam or exams, and whatever the case may be. You have waited patiently for the FCC to issue your call sign. You have gotten that. You have done exhaustive research and found the perfect radio for you. It is charged up, ready to go, hooked up, mounted in the car, wherever that might be. You turn it on, and silence. Where are all the conversations? How do you start a conversation? What's the etiquette when you're having a conversation over the radio? Let's talk about that for a minute. Stick with me. All right, gang, thanks for hanging in there with me. So one of the viewers said, hey, talk about radio etiquette, talk about nets, and what goes into talking on the radio. So first off, as somebody who was new to ham radio once, or just new to radio altogether, back in my police days, I know how intimidating it can be to get on the radio for the first time. But you've done all the preparation, you've done everything right, you've waited for the moment to use that, wonderful piece of equipment that you bought, and now you got to kind of figure out how to start a conversation and what the etiquette is to join conversations. One, don't be intimidated. We have all been there, we all understand, but we all also want you to come and join the conversation. One of the key things is whenever you start talking, just be conversational. It's no different than sitting in your living room and having a conversation with one of your friends or talking over the phone. You don't have to get into a lot of the special language that you hear hams using. Roger, you don't have to use Q codes. You don't have to do any of that kind of stuff. The phonetic alphabet, we do use it. Sometimes there are reasons to use it. But, there's no reason that everything you do has to be Alpha, Charlie, Echo. You don't have to do that. Not even your call sign. Usually, repeaters come in clear enough that you can just simply state your call sign. For me, just the W4 OLV is enough. Now, you may be on the fringe, if you're mobile, of being able to actually fully hit the repeater and be heard clearly. So at that time, you may be asked to repeat things. And if you are, that's an appropriate time to use phonetics. If somebody says, hey, can you repeat your call? And then you repeat your call, and then they ask again. If you begin to realize it's a problem, that's the time to use the phonetics. That's the time to do the, Whiskey 4 Oscar Victor Lima and throw it out there. And hopefully they'll be able to copy what your call sign is. Those times are very rare. Usually as time goes by, you begin to understand where your range for a particular repeater is when you can and can't talk on it clearly. And it's used mostly for local conversation. So just know that part. But we'll talk about some instances too where you got to be careful about repeaters as well. You don't have to call CQ. There's no reason to call CQ. That's an HF thing, not for repeaters. If you want to let people know that you're listening, monitoring, and ready to engage in a conversation, simply key up. And when I say key up, you're going to key. You need to hold the PTT switch for just a split second before you start talking, or you're going to clip off the first part of your statement. So you want to hold that for just a second, let the repeater kick in or open up the relay, and you are going to just simply state your call sign and state the word listening or monitoring. So it would just be, for me, W4OLV, monitoring. Sometimes I throw in what repeater I'm monitoring on. So I may say W4OLV monitoring W4GBI repeater. Now, that's just to let people know which repeater it is. You do have some folks who monitor basically 24/7. They're listening. And if they want to talk on the repeater or just talk in general, if they're scanning, they may not be able to get their radio to the radio in time to see what actual repeater you were broadcasting on. And for some folks, they receive, 6, 7, 8 repeaters out of their area. So it's important to kind of let people know exactly where you're at times. Expect somebody to respond to you when you say that. People are going to want to engage in conversation. You may not get it every time, but most times somebody will respond to you, and you can get engaged in a conversation. A lot of conversations revolve around, hey, what kind of gear are you using? Are you stationary, mobile? What's the weather like over by where you're at? Any number of things. Right now, a lot of folks talk about the pandemic and that kind of stuff. Just general conversation. Again, the conversation is no different than if we were just sitting somewhere having a normal face-to-face conversation. Now, one of the things I want to talk about with having conversations on a repeater and some of the etiquette, it gets involved when we start having more than just one-on-one conversation. One of the pieces of etiquette should be, you should pause during your conversations. You should have an intentional pause during those conversations so that you can allow people to, one, identify and join, and secondly and very importantly, we pause so that we can allow emergency traffic if somebody has it. That way it gives them an opportunity to declare the emergency, at which time you should respond and let them know that you've heard them, and then you probably should have a pen and paper ready to copy down some information that's going to be important to get relayed to emergency services. The other part and etiquette in having conversations on a repeater is when we get beyond one-on-one conversations and we have 3, 4, 5 people engaged in a conversation all at once. You can see how that can get confusing. Face-to-face, we take nonverbal cues and we kind of understand who's getting ready to comment or talk next and how it's getting just kind of naturally passed around. That's a little more difficult when you're conversing via radio. The nonverbal cues aren't always there. And if you miss a piece of conversation, it may be kind of hard to figure out where you're at. However, if we keep it very orderly, and typically what we see when we have 3 or 4 people in a conversation is they're just literally passing it on to the very next person, and they're passing it along in the same order each time. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't sidebar conversations that happen occasionally or comments, but as soon as that is over, that order gets reestablished and we pass it on to the very next person so that, again, they can rejoin the conversation, make comment, and we can continue the rag chew, the chat. So keep that in mind. One of the other things that we want to talk about too is IDing. And every 10 minutes you're supposed to ID yourself. However, nobody is going to freak out if you go 11, 12 minutes and haven't ID'd yourself. Just make sure that you get yourself ID'd as close to that 10-minute mark as you possibly can. But you also don't have to ID yourself every 2 minutes. You don't have to ID yourself after every time you speak, especially if you're having a one-on-one conversation. You don't want to keep IDing and keep IDing and keep IDing. You're just cutting into your conversation time. Kind of get yourself in a rhythm of about every 10 minutes. It'll be, you'll get that, yeah, I need to ID. So when you get done, and you pass it over, just ID yourself. And that will be more than sufficient. I'm not telling you to break FCC rules by any means. You want to follow the rules. But if you go over the 10-minute mark just a little bit, I promise you they're not going to come knocking at your door to revoke your license. Just keep that in mind. Do not kerchunk the repeaters. And by kerchunking the repeaters, I simply mean don't pick up your radio, turn it on, hit your PTT switch, and release it. You're activating the repeater, and you get a kerchunk sound, which is where that comes from, or the repeater will identify itself with code, or it will verbally identify itself in a lot of cases. Now, here's one of the other reasons you don't want to do that kind of stuff. Here's also one of the other reasons that you want to be very cognizant of the amount of time you are tying up a repeater. For some of you, I'm sure that you have an understanding of how repeaters work. You're here, the repeater's however many miles away, and somebody's on the other side of the repeater or off in the distance, and that's a way for you to get the long-range communications by having the tower repeat the message for you. However, what you may not know is there are such things as networked repeaters. You may have an entire string of repeaters across an entire state that are all linked together. So understand that when you key up or kerchunk one repeater, you've done it to 10 repeaters. So you have to be cognizant of that. The other reason too is when you're having conversations, understand that you may be tying up more than one repeater. And a lot of times networked or repeaters are there for emergency purposes so that communications can span an entire state, an entire region or area of the country. So keep that in mind. Be courteous. One of the things I can also say is, just don't be rude over the air. I've heard some folks who just get outright rude. Kind of the golden rule, if you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say anything. And it's probably the best way that you can go with that. You're going to find some people who are just rude on the radio. I don't want to mince words about it. They just kind of get rude on the radio. We also have folks out there who like to be disruptive in ham radio. They are not necessarily licensed. You do have some folks out there who are unlicensed and like to interrupt nets. They like to interrupt conversations by keying over, or I've heard people blast music, any number of things. Heard somebody blasting CNN one time over the air. Don't do stuff like that. We do understand, though, that there are also people who accidentally key PTT switch. You may sit on your radio. I've seen people who are driving, the microphone gets wedged somewhere and the switch gets hit on their mobile, and they're driving along and they have no idea that they have an open key, they have an open mic. One of the things I can tell you, the best thing you can do is actually set your mic or set your radio to time out your transmission. It's called a TOT, timeout transmission. And after so long, your radio will actually cut the transmission on its own. I think I have all of mine set for like 3 minutes, and the transmission will stop. That'll do two things. One, if you're on a handheld, it's going to save your battery. Two, it'll save the headache of people going, oh my God, I can't use the repeater because some guy's got his radio keyed up and has no idea. And it's just a courtesy. If you set that, you won't have to worry about it. You may accidentally hit your PTT and have an open mic for a little while, but eventually your radio will cut it off. Guys, that's some of the courtesies and some of the ways that you can get on the air, and some of the things to expect when you get on the air. There are tons of different things that go on that will allow you to have conversations with folks. Take advantage of that. If you hear somebody who's listening or monitoring, jump in there, have a conversation. If you hear a net that's an interesting topic to you, check in. Get that check in. Get on the air. Get your call sign out there. Get your name out there and start building your network of radio friends today. The other thing is join a club. A lot of clubs run their own nets, and it gives you an opportunity to meet people face to face, put a face with the call sign, so to speak, and then you can feel far more comfortable in engaging in conversation on those nets. Also, a lot of times clubs favor a certain repeater or pair of repeaters. It's a great way to have conversations and get involved with conversations with people that you know. Also, one of the other great tips is when you're traveling, look up some repeaters. Talk to folks. Meet folks. You'll be surprised that you'll meet some locals on the radio that may give you the next great place to eat while you're on vacation, or some good tips about getting around traffic, any number of things. Guys, don't be intimidated by the PTT switch. Get out there, get to talking. Congratulations on becoming a new ham, and we will see you next week.